Chapter 2361. Do I need to repeat what I just said, Mr. Weatherby? Royce was startled and said nervously, No. This woman is lying. When he saw Nolan and Maisie, his eyes were filled with hope. He got up to them and explained, Mr. and Mrs. Goldman, you've got to believe me. Everything I said is the truth. Nolan looked at him expressionlessly without saying anything. Maisie chuckled and said, My daughter-in-law spoke pretty clearly. Mr. Weatherby, do you think you're better than my own son? That's not what I mean. Colton walked up to Freya and pushed her to his back. Do you want me to show you the footage from the security camera? Royce knew he had lost his chance to explain himself when he heard that Colton was going to check the security camera. Beads of cold sweat began to break out from Royce's back. He dropped to his knees with a plop in front of Colton and pleaded for his mercy. I'm sorry, Mr. Goldman. It was all my fault. I hope you can give me another chance. After all, we still have cooperation. Colton grabbed his collar and punched him across his face, causing him to slide across the table and sweep the fruit plates and glasses to the floor. The people around were shocked and took a few steps back. Coleman. Maisie went forward and stopped him. Veins were bulging from the back of Colton's hand, and his eyes were bloodshot. He did not release Royce and continued to lash out at him, Forgive you? You have the nerve to lay your filthy hands on my woman. Do you think I'll forgive you? Royce was so shocked that he was tongue-tied. I'm sorry. I promise I won't do it again. Colton pushed him out of the door and dusted his suit. He summoned the bodyguards and ordered, Take him out of here. The bodyguards then brought Royce away. Maisie shook her head. It was such a nice one-month birthday celebration, yet a bad apple ruined it. The good thing was that the farce did not get any worse under Colton and Nolan's help. Everyone continued to enjoy the food and drinks as if nothing had happened. Soon, Daisy and the others arrived at the Goldman mansion. After learning from Barbara about what happened to Freya, she and Cameron went to check on Freya in her room. Freya was sitting on a couch with a cup of hot tea in her hand. Apparently, this event frightened her, and she had just come to her senses. You guys are here. Daisy sat beside her and asked, Are you all right, Freya? She shook her head. I'm fine. Crossing her arms in front of her chest, Cameron said, It seems like we're too late. If we were here a little bit sooner, I'd beat him to the point that even his parents wouldn't be able to recognize him. When she pretended to be a man in the past, she would always stand up for those women who got abused by men. No matter how many people they got, she would beat the hell out of them. Freya chuckled and said, Thank you, guys. But I'm fine now. Daisy smiled and said, Today is Charm's one-month birthday celebration, so we need to be happy. Now that the bad guy is gone, let's go out and celebrate Charm's birthday. Freya nodded, put the cup down, and followed them back to the hall. The celebration lasted for 2 hours before it finally ended. All of the friends and family members of the Goldmans gathered together for a group photo. Charm was the main focus of the day, so she sat with Titus in the center. Nicholas, Nolan, and Maisie sat at Titus' left side. On the right were Freya and Colton, while Daisy and Nolace stood beside Nolan and Maisie. Waylon and Cameron stood behind Freya and Colton. The people standing in the back row were the people from the Bouchers and the Cliffords from Octavia. Chapter 2362. Dee, Beatrice, and Francisco's son, Chadwick Boucher, all sat around Charm and had a good photo as well. Cameron took the photo out inside the car and asked with a frown, Why do I have to take a family photo with you guys? Waylon, who was driving the car, touched his lips with his finger and chuckled. Congratulations on becoming one of the Goldmans, then. She turned her head around. I'm not one of the Goldmans yet. Waylon took a glance at her and pulled over. He turned around and approached her. So, when do you want to officially become one of the Goldmans? Cameron did not reply. Waylon caressed the corner of her eyes with his finger and gazed intently at her lips. She was distracted for a moment, and then a pair of gentle and warm lips landed on hers. Her eyelashes twitched as she placed her hands on his chest. She was falling deeper and deeper in his kiss. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door, and that snapped Cameron back to reality. She hastily pushed him away, and her cheeks turned red with embarrassment. Waylon rolled his window down. The police officer leaned down and said in a stern voice, "Sir, this is a fire lane. It isn't for you to park your car." Waylon nodded at him slightly and said, "I'm sorry. My wife suddenly felt dizzy, so I had no choice but to stop here." "Give me the ticket. I'll pay it when I get back." Seeing how polite he was and that the woman in the passenger's seat was not feeling well, the traffic police officer said, "I can understand that you're worried about your wife. I'll let you go this time, but don't simply park at the fire lane next time." Waylon offered him a smile and said, "Sure. Thank you, officer." After the traffic police officer left, Waylon rolled the window up and left unhurriedly. Cameron buried her face in her palm. She did not expect that she had fallen so far to the point that she had to cooperate with him in lying to the traffic police. Waylon glanced at her and chuckled. "What's wrong? Are you scared? It seems like I've underestimated you. You could even lie to that police officer with a straight face." Cameron sized Waylon up. From the beginning to the end, Waylon's face was so calm that nobody would suspect that he was telling lies. She was forced to pretend that she had a stomach ache, but she was really scared. Waylon spun the steering wheel left and slowed down at the intersection where the crowds met. People always have to lie for a reason. "Haven't you ever told any lies?" Cameron leaned on the back of the seat. "Tell lies, huh?" It went without saying that she had done it before. There was no one in this world who had never told any lies before since they were born. After all, even a small white lie was also considered a lie. At night, at the Seaview Villa, Colton brought Charm back to her room. After putting her down gently on the crib, he went back to his room. Freya was standing in front of the ceiling-to-floor window. She looked at the courtyard through the window and seemed a little bit under the weather. Colton walked up to her, and she turned around to look at him. "I'm sorry for the trouble today, Colton. I didn't expect something like that would happen at Charm's birthday celebration." "So, you think it's your fault?" Freya was stunned at Colton's question. She lowered her head. "No. I didn't think it was my fault." "Since it wasn't your fault, why do you think you brought us trouble?" Colton grabbed her into his arms and rested his chin on her head. "You didn't do anything wrong. You don't have to make any concessions to anyone. Don't forget that you're one of the Goldmans. As long as you're holding that title, you don't have to worry about anything." Freya chuckled and raised her head to look at him. "Yes, it's true that I'm one of the Goldmans and I don't have to worry about anything, but there is a difference. If I have to rely on you and you stop loving me in the future, then I'll be left with nothing." Colton frowned. "Who told you that I won't love you anymore in the future?" Freya helped him to take off his tie and continued. "If I have to rely on you for everything, then I'll need to stay low and curry favor with you in the future. Not only that, but I'll have to worry about being abandoned by you. I can't even use my own ideas. This isn't the life I want." Chapter 2363. Colton grabbed her hand. "Freya, you." "So, I've made up my mind." Freya ripped off his tie, disheveling his collar. As she approached him, she said, "I'll make myself stand as close to you as possible. It doesn't matter if I can't reach your height. At the very least, I have to show everyone that I'm not useless without you." Initially, Colton thought she was going to say something like she wanted to leave again. He did not expect something like that from her, and he was stunned for a moment. After a while, he grabbed her into his arms. The neon lights outside the window had cast a shadow over them. "When are you going back?" Freya coiled her arms around his neck and answered, "Tomorrow afternoon, so." Colton pinned her to the window and kissed her. She took off his jacket and dropped it on the floor. Dewdrops dotted the window, mottling the light that poured in from the outside street lamps. In the dim light, under the cover of darkness, two figures were engaged in the tabooest of acts. Then, the crying of Charm wafted into their ears from the room next door. Freya buried her face into his shoulder and chuckled hoarsely. Your daughter is crying. Colton was caught between tears and laughter. He kissed her forehead and said, I'm sure that kid is doing it on purpose. I must punish her for ruining such a good time. Colton picked up the shirt on the floor and headed to the room next door. Charm had kicked her quilt away and had cried herself hoarse. He massaged his nose and picked Charm up from her crib. There was no way he was going to get angry at her. He said, all right, stop crying. You know how hard it is for your parents to have some private time for themselves. How can you ruin it? You must be doing it on purpose, right? Soon, Charm stopped crying and started mumbling something that he could not understand. Colton patted her back gently and said matter-of-factly, okay, I'll forgive you. No, you don't need to apologize. I won't spank you. Freya was standing at the door and chuckled. I didn't know that you could understand baby language. She walked up to them and took Charm away from Colton. Are you hungry, Charm? Let me get you some milk downstairs. They switched on the light in the living room. Freya was holding Charm with one hand while pouring milk powder into a bottle with her other hand. After the water boiled, she poured the water into the bottle and capped the bottle. After that, she put the bottle into a bowl of cool water to cool down the milk. She was the one who took care of Dee Dee in the past, so she was very familiar with all these. Crossing his arms in front of his chest, Colton leaned on the table and looked at them. The people in front of him were his wife and daughter. They were the ones who made this place feel like home, and he was not against something like this. After the milk had cooled down, she gave the bottle to Charm. Charm then began to drink the milk quietly. Colton hugged them from the back and rested his chin on Freya's shoulder. Freya, let's go get a marriage certificate. They already had a daughter, so they just needed to get a certificate. Freya turned her head around and said, You've got to wait for me to return. Colton frowned. Seriously? She smiled. Yes, I'm serious. I want you to wait for me. Colton was rendered speechless. There was no way. He could only wait for her. After all, she was his woman now. Both of them had a daughter, so there was no way she would run away from him. The next day, Colton sent Freya to the airport. After taking her suitcase, she walked forward and stopped midway. She turned around and looked at Colton, who was standing in front of the car. She went back to him and threw herself into his arms. Colton was stunned for a moment, but still coiled his arms around her. After a short while, Freya looked at him and said, Remember to take care of our daughter and Dee Dee. Don't forget to miss me too. After Freya finished speaking, she pulled herself away from his arms and entered the airport. Chapter 2364. Colton looked at his empty arms until Freya's figure disappeared into the crowd. She had only left him for a few minutes, and he had already started to miss her. He did not know how he was going to spend his life without Freya. At that moment, his phone rang. It was Leonardo. Colton answered the call, and Leonardo said, Sir, Mr. Weatherby wants to see you. Colton frowned. Royce was waiting for Colton in the lobby of the Black Gold Group. He told them he would not leave until he saw Colton. Leonardo couldn't send him away, so he had no other choice but to call Colton. When Colton appeared in the lobby, Royce knelt before him and pleaded, Mr. Goldman, I'm really sorry about what I did. Please forgive me. I'll do everything you say. Just don't cancel the cooperation between our companies. The Black Gold Group monopolized most of the technology and construction industries in Bassburg. If no company wanted to supply materials for him, his company would be done for. Colton looked expressionlessly at him. He remained impassive toward his plea as he said, Mr. Weatherby, you don't even have the basic respect for people, and you still want to take advantage of the Black Gold Group? Who do you think we are? Some kind of charity that will help everyone? Royce was stunned. Initially, he thought Colton was someone who valued benefits and interests more than anything else. Even though Colton had kicked him out of his daughter's birthday celebration, he was confident that he was doing it because he had to stand up for his family. He was certain that Colton would not sever their partnership just because of a woman. After all, an ambitious man valued nothing more than his interests. For him, women were insignificant. Their job was to raise their kids and support their husbands. There was no way they could interfere with their husbands' decisions in their business. All he had to do was apologize to Colton, and the latter would forgive him. He did not expect that Colton would really terminate their partnership. "Mr. Goldman, I can increase the percentage of profits to you by 20%. It's okay if I earn less. Is that okay?" Colton's eyes were cold as he said, "Do you not understand what I say? Do you think I'll need that little profit of yours?" Royce became even more nervous. "I'm sorry, Mr. Goldman. I can apologize to your wife. I promise I won't do that again." Colton grabbed Royce by his collar and glared at him furiously. "Again? It seems to me that you look down on women a lot. When you were making a false charge against her, did you ever think of what would happen if no one trusted her? For you, a woman's reputation and innocence are nothing? You could ride roughshod over her just because her family wasn't there?" Royce cried, "I'm sorry. It's too late. You should prepare yourself for this outcome from the moment you humiliated my woman." Colton pushed him away and called the security guard. "Get him out of here. Don't let him set his foot in the Black Gold Group ever again." The security guard pulled Royce out of the building. He kept shouting and apologizing, but everyone ignored him. Colton turned around to look at Leonardo and said, "I want you to pass this instruction to all of our subsidiaries. No one is allowed to give any help to Royce's company, and any violation will be treated as a breach of contract." After Colton severed the partnership with Royce's company, every company that cooperated with the Black Gold Group did not dare to help Royce. They all avoided Royce as they couldn't afford to mess with the Black Gold Group. After all, nobody wanted to get the short end of the stick and lose their interest. Several days after Freya left for Yarramore, Colton felt a bit uncomfortable with her not being around. Even during the meetings, he was worried about whether someone would bully her. After the meeting was over, Colton returned to his office. He pulled his phone out but had not received any text message or call from Freya. Chapter 2365. Colton frowned deeply. Why isn't she sending me any text messages or calling me? Leonardo appeared at the door. "Mr. Goldman." He replied absent-mindedly, "Yeah?" "Your brother is here," replied Leonardo. After that, he turned sideways to make way for Waylon. Leonardo made a pot of tea for both of them, put the teapot on the table, and left the office. Waylon picked up the teapot and poured himself a cup of tea. "I heard that Freya has returned to Yarramore?" "Yeah," replied Colton. "Just say what you want to say. There are only two of us here." Waylon chuckled. He knew something was troubling Colton. Colton leaned against the back of the chair and said, "It has been a few days since she returned to Yarramore, but she hasn't given me any call yet. I'm worried about her." Waylon laughed. "It has only been 4 days. There's nothing to worry about." Colton crossed his arms in front of his chest and replied, "She should at least give me a call." Waylon placed the teacup in front of his lips and said, "Maybe she ran into something." Seeing that Colton was getting a bit restless, he chuckled, "If you're so worried about her, you can go to Yarramore to keep her company." Colton frowned. "But what about the company? Your mind is full of her now. You have to worry about her and the company at the same time. Do you think you can manage 2 things at once?" Waylon said as he took a sip from the tea. Freya had gotten pregnant before she was married. Even if the Goldmans had acknowledged her as their daughter-in-law, it was a fact that they hadn't gotten their marriage certified yet. Colton pressed his lips tightly and said, "I've talked about getting our marriage registered with her." "What did she say?" "She said to wait for her to come back." Waylon chuckled. "Well, you had the chance to bring that up, but you didn't, so you can only wait now." Colton was rendered speechless. When he thought about it, it was true that he did not seem to be spending so much time with Freya. They did not even have a decent date before. Colton decided to take the initiative to make a call, but Freya's phone had been switched off. The bad feeling inside of him just got stronger. Waylon narrowed his eyes. What's the matter? She switched her phone off. She couldn't have turned off her phone for no reason. Colton picked up his jacket and rose to his feet. Waylon, I'll leave the company in your care. Without waiting for Waylon to say anything, he left. Waylon chuckled helplessly. He did not expect his workaholic brother to leave the company behind. Meanwhile, at Yarramore, Freya was reporting to the police since her phone was stolen. After that, she bought a new phone number and went to a nearby convenience store to make a call through the landline. The call was on hold for some time before it was picked up. Hello? Dad, it's me. Brandon was stunned. Faye? Freya took a cab to return to the Pruitt Manor. Luckily, she had some cash with her. She had mixed feelings as she stepped into the courtyard, where she hadn't been back for years. She had come back once after her brother's death. Then, she did not set her foot in this courtyard anymore. Brandon opened the door and was stunned when he saw Freya. Faye? Is that really you? Freya nodded. Brandon invited her into the house. As he was cleaning the table, Freya looked around the house. Everything remained the same in the living room. However, those maids and butlers were nowhere to be found. It was empty, and she felt desolated. Chapter 2366. Brandon opened the refrigerator, and there was nothing in it, leaving him feeling a little embarrassed. I haven't been preparing anything to eat in a long time. You should take a seat first. I'll go out to buy some ingredients. What do you want to eat tonight? Freya sat on the couch. Whatever, anything will do. Brandon walked to the entryway, picked up his coat, and put it on. Okay, then I'll go out now. Freya stopped him. Dad. Brandon turned back and was stunned for a short moment. Freya added, I'll go with you. The father and daughter went to the supermarket to buy some ingredients and food. Freya had not gone out with her father for a long time. She vaguely remembered that she was only a few years old the last time her father took her out to play. 20 years had passed in the blink of an eye. In the family that she used to have, her mother was mightily aggressive, and her father was extremely cowardly, and that combination caused the relationship between her and her father to grow farther and farther apart. Brandon did not seem to know how to get along with his daughter anymore. He seemed very cautious for fear of being hated. He stood in front of the shelf to pick the ingredients needed to cook a meal, asking her what she liked along the way. Freya responded slowly, Dad, just choose whatever ingredients you can cook. I'm not that picky. After buying all the ingredients and returning to the Pruitt Manor, Brandon started preparing dinner. Freya suddenly found an orange cat hiding under the couch. She stretched out her arms and fished the orange cat out of the bottom. After taking a closer look at it, she realized that its left eye was traumatized and blinded. She placed the orange cat on her thighs and stroked its fur. It struggled at first, but after seeing that Freya showed no malicious intent, it lay down on her stomach and stopped moving around. Brandon brought dinner to the table after some time. Freya asked, What happened to this cat's eye? Brandon replied, It was already partially blind when I took it in. She was startled. It was a stray cat? Brandon set up the tableware. Yes, I saw it was wandering around the area, looking all pitiful, and no one wanted it, so I took it in. The manor is rather quiet and deserted, and it's good to have it around here. Freya's eyes moved, and she placed the orange cat down. The cat scurried to Brandon's feet and rubbed its head against his ankle. Brandon picked it up. It should be hungry. You should start eating first. I'll feed it. Freya looked at the dinner on the table. All of the dishes were made from the ingredients that they had just bought, and he had cooked them all. Seeing that, she suddenly remembered something, walked to the refrigerator, and opened it. It was not that there was no ingredient in the refrigerator. It was just that there were no fresh ingredients. They had been kept in the refrigerator for a long time, and there were also leftovers from previous days. Why didn't I realize it? When my mother and Ken were still living there, we had servants, so Dad had already gotten used to being served. Now that my mother and Ken are gone, he should have kept a servant or housekeeper for himself. However, all the servants in the manor have been far laid off. Ever since he said he doesn't have fresh ingredients, I started suspecting him. The mall isn't away, and he thought of going to the supermarket to buy some fresh ingredients earlier, so how could there be no fresh food in the refrigerator? Freya's eyes turned bloodshot, and she emptied everything from the refrigerator. When Brandon came back, he was astonished upon seeing Freya clearing the refrigerator's contents. Freya threw everything into the trash can and underwent an emotional breakdown. How do you live alone? Do you plan to wait for these ingredients to rot in the fridge before you start eating them? You only warm up and eat leftovers every day, and you're still unwilling to throw them away even after you've left them there for several days? It's not that you don't have the money. How much would the ingredients needed for you to cook a meal cost? Do you know that these leftovers have already gone bad? They're no longer fresh and can't be eaten already, yet you're still reluctant to throw them away. What do you plan to do with them? Brandon did not say anything, and his expression turned solemn. Freya took a deep breath and calmed down. Since you've gotten used to being served, why would you fire the servants? Is the money that Ken and Mother left you not enough for you to hire a servant or housekeeper? Even if you are short of money, just tell me. I can help you that. Chapter 2367. The living room was silent for a moment. Brandon was stunned for a long time, then lowered his head. Faye. I just don't want to cause you trouble. He added slowly, and there's no need to spend so much money on food. As long as it's still edible, it'll get me going. I'm still doing well now, aren't I? Freya scoffed out of anger. Just give it to me straight. Are the Pruitts running out of money already? He did not utter a single word. I found out almost instantly when I first stepped into this place. The car parked outside is gone. You must have sold it. The things in the house haven't changed much, but all the antiques that my mother bought back then are all gone now. Freya pointed to the empty cabinet. Mother had gotten used to living a luxurious lifestyle, and the antiques were her babies, so there's no way that she would sell them away. That would leave me with only one possibility. Dad sold all the antiques and dismissed all the servants after my mother got into jail. He obviously knows how to cook, but he's reluctant to buy fresh ingredients. And what's left in the refrigerator? Frozen meat and frozen food that smell. Even the leftovers are days old and so dry that they're sticking to the plate. At the same time, the layer of oil found on the food has already turned white and waxy. Brandon pursed his lips, looking a little defeated and powerless. I'm sorry. So tell me now, where did all the money go? After yelling at him, Freya suddenly remembered something, and her face paled slightly. Is it Mother? Brandon was silent. Freya froze in place. When my mother brought Didi to Basburg to find me, why didn't I think of? Why would she bring Didi to Basburg just to threaten me? Faye. Don't blame your mother, You're still defending her at this moment? Freya's eyes were bloodshot, and she gnashed her teeth. She took all the money with her, didn't she? Brandon kept quiet and did not explain anything. Freya knew about her father's submissive temperament since she was a kid. Even though her mother had done something bad to him, he would never blame her. Thinking of this, she did not know whether to blame her father for his kindness or his cowardice. Why didn't you tell me? Faye, there's really no need. Freya raised her voice. You don't think it's necessary? That's why you didn't tell me about all this. If I really didn't plan to come back here for the rest of my life, when you've run out of items to sell, did you plan to sell the manor away and live on the street? Brandon looked like a child who had done something wrong. He kept his head down and did not dare to utter a single word. After venting out all her wrath, Freya remained silent for a moment. Let's eat first. We'll discuss this later. Seeing that she was really angry, Brandon could only sit down. Freya continued to reprimand him while serving the meal. Look at you. You're living alone, but can't take care of yourself. I actually thought of sending Dee Dee back here, to stay with you back then. Looking back at my decision now, thank God, I didn't send her back here. Otherwise, she would have had to starve with you. I'm sorry, Faye. She picked up her silverware. You don't have to apologize to me. I'll hire a housekeeper from tomorrow onward. I'm about to sit for a postgraduate program entrance examination, and I don't have the time to go through all the details with you. However, you'll always be my father, and I can't just let you be. As for the housekeeper's pay, I'll settle the financial side of things, so you don't need to worry about it. I've troubled you again. Brandon lowered his gaze. Faye, even if you choose not to care about me, I won't blame you. You've grown up and have your own life now. I shouldn't be a burden to you. Freya did not respond to him. The food is going to get cold. You should eat first. Brandon did not say anything anymore. The next day, Freya got up early and went out to buy breakfast. When she returned, she frowned when she saw Brandon secretly storing last night's meals in the refrigerator. Chapter 2368. Freya knew that her father cooked up a feast last night only to store them in the refrigerator when they could not finish them. When Brandon saw Freya had returned, he was flustered. He immediately closed the door of the refrigerator and explained, "It's just last night's dishes. Throwing them away now will be a waste." Freya did not say anything and placed the breakfast on the table. Buy as much as you can eat in the future. Try not to keep dishes overnight. Brandon replied instantly, "Okay, I'll do so." But she exposed him mercilessly. "If I wasn't here, you wouldn't do so at all, would you?" Brandon walked to the table, pulled out the chair, and sat down. "Do you plan to go back to the college for a postgraduate program entrance examination?" She peeled off the seal of a cheese sauce, grabbed some bread, and dipped it in cheese. "Yes, I'm going back to college today." Brandon was about to say something when the doorbell rang. Freya got up. "I'll go." Freya came to open the door and was astounded when she saw the man standing outside. It felt like a dream. Colton was wearing a coat, a gray scarf, and some casual and comfortable clothes. There was also a suitcase beside him. His face looked stiff from the freezing weather, and a chilling aura shrouded his body from head to toe. Freya snapped back to her senses. "Colton, why are you?" "Freya Pruitt, why did you turn off your phone?" She was stunned. Did he just fly over here to look for me because he couldn't get to me through a phone call? "Faye, who's that?" Brandon came out and was dumbfounded when he saw Coleman standing at the door. Freya turned her head around. "You should go back and finish your breakfast." "Okay." Brandon did not dare to ask any more questions and went back to the dining hall to eat his breakfast. Freya closed the door and held Colton's cold hand. "Did you come all the way here to find me because you couldn't reach me? What else would the reason be? Do I look like a man that has nothing better to do?" Colton was slightly annoyed. "Do you know how worried I was? Don't you know how to call or text me to let me know that you are okay? Besides, you even turned off your phone. I really thought something had happened to you." Freya stared at him and laughed out loud. "I lost my cell phone and just got my SIM card reissued." Coleman took a deep breath and rubbed his forehead. "So you only lost your phone? Nothing else happened?" Freya raised her eyebrows. "Do you really want something to happen to me?" "Of course not." Freya stood on tiptoe, kissed him, and then laughed. "I'm sorry. Do you feel better now?" How could Colton be angry at this very moment? Even if he was exasperated, it would have disappeared long ago. He embraced her in his arms. "Don't think that you'll get away with it with only a kiss." Freya pressed her finger against his lips. "My dad is here. If you want anything other than a kiss, it'll be a no from me. Then I'll have to collect a little more interest." Colton pinched her chin and kissed her lips again. After a moment of intimate entanglement, Colton suddenly pushed her away, turned his head, and sneezed. His nose was flushed from the cold weather. Freya sneered and took his hand. "Come in." Colton sat on the couch, and Freya poured him a glass of warm water. Brandon wanted to say something, but he did not dare to voice it out as he was afraid that his daughter would get angry. As such, he said after finishing his breakfast, "Faye, I've eaten my breakfast already. I'll go upstairs first." "What are you going to do upstairs?" "You'll have to go shopping with him at noon." Brandon was taken aback. "Huh?" Colton frowned. "I have to go too." Freya looked at him. "I'm going back to college at 10 a.m., and I won't have time to buy ingredients for dinner, so do you plan not to eat dinner?" Colton did not talk back. Brandon suggested embarrassedly, "I can go alone." Freya's attitude was rigid. "Mr. Goldman is quite a picky eater, and you don't know what he likes to eat. He's a guest, so we shouldn't neglect his preference when it comes to dinner. Just let him tag along when you go shopping later." I won't take no for an answer. Chapter 2369. Brandon did not dare to say no to that, so he could only bring their guest along. Colton squinted slightly. "Guest? Am I just a guest?" Freya leaned over and glanced at him. "Otherwise, what else do you want to be? You're at my house now, so who are you going to listen to?" Colton gnashed his teeth and responded in a low voice, "Okay, I'll listen to you." "That's right, good boy." Freya took out some cash and shoved them into his hand. "These are for grocery shopping. Don't go on a shopping spree." Colton was rendered speechless. After Freya went back to college, Colton went to the supermarket with Brandon to buy some ingredients, but the two did not talk much, making the atmosphere a little awkward. After all, they did not know each other too well. Colton did not like Freya's family too much, because of Sandy and Ken. However, Brandon was Freya's father, so he still showed him some respect. "Ahem, how should I address you?" Brandon was the first to break the silence as he felt a little embarrassed that he did not know the man's name. He sounded indifferent. Coleman Goldman." Brandon asked again, "Then what's your relationship with Faye?" Colton frowned. "Mrs. Pruitt knows about my relationship with Freya, but he doesn't?" Seeing that Colton did not answer his question, Brandon did not continue to ask any more questions. He had probably realized that Colton did not like him very much, and he did not want to cause his daughter too much trouble by upsetting her guest. Seeing Brandon's distressed expression, Colton thought that he had bullied this old man before they came to the supermarket. Thus, he rubbed the bridge of his nose. "What relationship do you think we have?" Brandon was flustered. "Are you dating each other?" Colton responded with a hum. Brandon gave off a happy smile. "Good, glad to hear that." Colton thought that he would act the same as Sandy, as Freya's relationship with him was certainly good news for him. Just as he was about to speak, Brandon spoke slowly. "I can finally rest assured that someone is taking care of her. At least she doesn't have to suffer alone. She has a very strong and stubborn personality, so I shall apologize to you and thank you on her behalf for the things you'll do for her in the future." Colton swallowed the words that were about to escape his mouth and slowed down his pace. As Brandon pushed the shopping cart up to the shelf to choose the ingredients that he wanted, he did not seem to realize that Colton had already fallen behind. "Faye said that you're rather picky when it comes to your food. I'm afraid that you won't like what I choose, so remember to tell me what you want to eat." Colton's eyes moved, and he replied after a while, "Anything will do." Back in Bassburg, at Black Gold. Colton had gone to Yarramore, so Waylon had to temporarily take over the company. Leonardo reported to Waylon about all the unfinished arrangements. Waylon flipped through the document. "What's this wine party that's taking place tonight?" Leonardo took a glance at the itinerary. "It's about the collaboration between Dominic Constructions from the port area and us. Mr. Goldman successfully secured the project about half a month ago. He does know when to get away from work." Waylon rubbed his temples, scoffed, closed the documents in his hands, and placed them on the desk. "Then I shall attend the party with his identity." Leonardo was startled. With his identity? He did not understand what Waylon meant at the moment until later that night when he came to pick Waylon up. That was when he was shocked. "Mr. Gold." There was a mole on the corner of Waylon's eye, and even his hairstyle was almost a replica of that of Colton's. If Leonardo had not known that Colton had gone abroad, he would have almost mistaken him for Colton. Leonardo exclaimed, "The resemblance is really uncanny. It's not that I haven't dressed up as him before this." "Let's go already," Waylon said as he got into the car. Leonardo drove the car to the Century Hotel, and Waylon went into the banquet hall with Leonardo. As soon as they got into the hall, a middle-aged man with a wine glass came to greet Waylon and communicated with him in his not-so-fluent English. "Mr. Goldman, you are here, finally." Chapter 2370. Waylon greeted him with a handshake. "Mr. Warren, sorry to have kept you waiting." Harold waved his hand. "Nah, we've just started. Come, let me introduce you to some of my business partners." Harold led Waylon to several older men and introduced him enthusiastically. All of them have certain levels of cooperation with Dominic Constructions. "This is Mr. Nixon Weber, Mr. Torres Xanthos, and Mr. Malin Holland." Waylon nodded to each of them. Nixon laughed. "I've always wanted to meet the second heir of the Goldmans. Now that I get to meet you in person, you look as impressive as rumors have it." "As expected of the son of the legendary Nolan Goldman." Waylon responded modestly, "You're flattering me, Mr. Weber." Nixon sighed. "If not for the fact that you're already unavailable and occupied, I'd definitely introduce my daughter to you." Torres added, "Isn't there another young heir? Mr. Goldman's elder brother? He must look a lot like Mr. Goldman." Waylon picked up the wine glass on the table and chuckled without saying a word. At that moment, a voice came from behind, "Dad." Waylon placed the mouth of the wine glass against his lips and froze for a split second. "This woman, it's Minzy Holland." Malin asked, "Why are you here?" Minzy stopped beside him and said, "I've come to take a look around." Her gaze then landed on Waylon, and she was slightly startled. Malin introduced her to Waylon. "This is Coleman Goldman, the second young heir of the Goldmans. We're talking about business." Waylon nodded, drank his wine unhurriedly, and did not answer. Minzy took a closer look at him and could not take her eyes off him for a long time until Malin reminded her of something. That was when she finally recovered from a trance and said, "It turns out that the second son and the eldest son do look very alike. I almost took you for your elder brother." "I'm sorry about that, Mr. Goldman." When Nixon heard this, his interest was piqued. "Miss Holland, have you ever met the eldest heir of the Goldmans?" Minzy replied with a smile, "I've been fortunate enough to meet him while I was on the East Islands." The others got even more curious, especially those who had not met Waylon in person. Waylon casually glanced at the wine glass in his hand. It was quite interesting to listen to others talk about him when he was standing right in front of them. Minzy turned her head, and her gaze was fixed on him for some time as she sank deeper into her thoughts. Waylon was not interested in the wine party. He had only come on behalf of his younger brother. Later that night, Leonardo was basically the one who entertained all of Colton's business partners. The ceiling in the corridor was bright because of the chandeliers. Waylon stood in front of the French window and looked down at his phone. In the blink of an eye, a figure approached him. "Are you Mr. Wayne Goldman?" Waylon frowned slightly and turned around, only to realize that it was Minzy. "Miss Holland, how did you recognize me?" Minzy replied with a smile, "Although you look a lot like your younger brother, I've seen him in magazines. There are still slight differences between you and your brother, especially the way your gazes look. Coleman Goldman's gaze looks deep, sharp, gloomy, and unforgiving. However, Wayne Goldman's gaze is indifferent, keen, stern, and underneath all those characteristics, there is a little warmth, which makes him look less ruthless." Waylon put away his phone. "It seems that you're very good at observing others, Miss Holland." Minzy asked, "Why did you attend the wine reception in place of your brother?" He stared out of the window. "He went abroad at the very last minute, so I've taken over his place temporarily." "I see." Minzy smiled. "However, you didn't get recognized as an imposter, so it seems that you resemble each other very much." Waylon gave off a faint smile. "But you've recognized me, haven't you, Miss Holland?" Minzy lowered her gaze and fiddled with the bracelet on her wrist. Getting to meet you again here is truly a coincidence. After saying that, she smiled at Waylon. Although we can't be lovers, I hope we still can be friends. Waylon squinted slightly. Minzy added instantly, don't take me wrong. It's just that I don't have many friends in Basburg.